So you want to sue an individual or a company. In this video, I'm going to provide you with general information about things you have to think about before you file a lawsuit against an individual or a company. My name is Mehdi CHerkaoui. I'm a civil litigation attorney in Houston, Texas. My channel provides general information about civil litigation, and that's anywhere from suing someone for money or a company or a mechanic or a doctor, all the way to divorce cases. If you like the content of my channel, please subscribe, hit the like button, and let's get into today's video. Okay, but before we get started, I am not your lawyer. This is not legal advice. This video is for educational and informational purposes only. If you have a situation that requires legal advice, I suggest and recommend you seek a lawyer in your city or state. So the first thing you want to ask yourself when you think about filing a lawsuit against an individual or company is it worth it? Is it worth it in terms of damages? So what you want to do is compare the amount of money that you think you've lost as a result of the wrongdoing of this individual company. Compare that to the amount that you'll have to pay an attorney to file a lawsuit. Lawsuits are not cheap. Everybody understands that. So you have to look at how much is a lawyer going to charge me in comparison to what I've lost as a result of what someone did to you and that in your mind deserves to be sued. I'll give you an example. So let's say you have an issue with a mechanic over repairs that cost you $2,000. The mechanic didn't do his job. Now the vehicle needs repairs, and the amount of damages is $2,000. If the attorney that you find is going to charge you a $5,000 retainer in order to file this lawsuit, well, I would suggest to you that it's probably not worth it financially. The good news is, here in Texas, like most states, there are small claims courts. And what are small claims courts? Small claims courts are basically informal courts where an average individual can represent themselves. You go to the small claims court, you fill out some paperwork, you write down a narrative of what happened and how did this person or company violate your rights and how much you think you're entitled to. You take these documents and you typically serve them over on the person or the company, and the clerk of the court should be able to explain to you. It's not a very difficult concept. Small claims court basically allows you to go against a company or individual without incurring the cost of a lawyer. So it may be very appealing to a lot of people to represent themselves. The other good news about small claims court is that it doesn't require any knowledge of civil procedure or any knowledge of rules of evidence. Basically, anyone can do it. You get a day in court. The judge will decide at some point whether you've been wronged or not. And in the event that you succeed, the judge will give you a judgment to execute on the defendant. Here in Texas, the legislation just raised the maximum amount of damages in small claims court from $10,000 to $20,000. So if your dispute with this individual or company caused you damages that are $20,000 or less, then I encourage you to consider the option of going to small claims courts and save yourself the hassle of going to a lawyer. Now, if your damages are more than $20,000, let's say you had a dispute with a construction company and your damages are $100,000. And damages can be anything that is monetary, obviously, something that it went wrong, something that you have to pay out of pocket if you were to remedy the situation. Other damages could be health, in terms of mental anguish, in terms of stress, in terms of pain and suffering. All of that, of course, has to be substantiated by some medical professional that can give you a report saying that you have sustained damages or you are suffering from a particular health condition as a result of the defendant's wrongdoing. The second thing you want to think about is, do you have evidence? Well, do you have enough evidence to prove that this individual or company committed what you allege that they have committed? For example, evidence could be a recording, whether it's video or audio. It could be anything in writing. It doesn't have to be a contract. Usually it's a contract, and we'll get to the contract here in a little bit. but you want to have anything that documents the wrongdoing. So emails, text messages, Facebook posts, Twitter posts, anything that's on social media. Usually you don't want to go to court over, and the only evidence that you have is, let's say, somebody told me or I heard. That in court is considered hearsay, and it's usually not admissible in a court of law. So make sure you have enough evidence to show that you have been wronged. An example of that could be, let's say someone, you had a contract with a company or individual, and they sent you an email saying that they're not going to perform as they promised that they would perform. They're not going to do something. Let's say you want to sue a landlord and you had damages in your apartment that the landlord is refusing to cover. Then of course you want to take pictures of the damages so that you can prove that you've been damaged and you are entitled to some kind of recovery. The third question you want to ask yourself is, how long is this going to take? Well, let me tell you, litigation is not a speedy process. Lawsuits typically take about 1.5 years to possibly 2 years before you get to trial. In this COVID environment that we're in, courts have been delayed even further, especially if you're looking for a jury trial. Jury trials have been delayed, they've been backed up. Now, courts here in Texas have been prioritizing criminal proceedings over civil proceedings. So you'll find that ultimately getting to a jury trial is going to be a very lengthy process. So think about that and ask yourself whether you have the patience, the endurance, and the resources to go through with a lawsuit all the way until the trial period. The fourth question you have to ask yourself, who am I suing? Am I suing an individual or am I suing a company? So you want to make sure that whoever you're suing has the means eventually to pay in the event of damages. But putting that aside, in terms of who you're suing, if you sue an individual or you sue in a company, you have to look at what kind of resources do they have. Obviously, if you sue the landlord and it's an individual, they're more likely to engage with you after you file the lawsuit. They realize you're serious, and they're also looking at their own attorney's fees that they have to spend to defend your lawsuit. So when you look at attorney's fees, and in the industry, between lawyers, we say that attorney's fees are the best motivation to settle, because ultimately you're going to be paying your lawyer and the defendant is going to be paying their lawyer, and ultimately these attorney's fees are going to continue to rise, and it would give a motivation to both parties to ultimately settle the case. So think about whether you're suing an individual as opposed to a company. They may have deeper pockets, and they're also perhaps on a mission to discourage lawsuits like the one that you want to file, and they want to continue to pay their attorneys. A lot of companies have litigation attorneys that are on retainer, and they sometimes get a discount. So they may not be paying the full rate of this attorney because they get so much business from this company, and they're able to they have more runway, if you will. They're able to outlast most plaintiffs that are coming up with a lawsuit against them. So sometimes they can outlast them, and the plaintiff just gives up or decides that this is not worth it. So think about that when you're deciding to file a lawsuit. The last question you want to ask yourself, and in my opinion, as an attorney that typically represents a plaintiff from A, which is filing the lawsuit, to Z, which is actually getting paid. That last question is, am I going to collect? So you pause for a second and you imagine, you and your attorney, or just you by yourself, you imagine that you actually went through the lawsuit process. You have hired a lawyer, filed a lawsuit, served the individual or company, went through the discovery process, went through hearings, went to trial, whether it's a judge or a jury trial. You received a judgment. 30 days after the judgment have passed, there is no appeal. Now it's time to execute. You think about that entire process proactively before it actually happens, and then you ask yourself, how likely am I to execute on this judgment? There's something called being judgment proof. I'm sure you've heard about that. Some people may say it, or you've heard it in movies or TV shows. Judgment proof is basically an individual or a company that has no assets, therefore you cannot execute a judgment on. Now, in the state of Texas, where I am licensed, there is exemptions over homestead and certain personal property that a creditor, who is someone that has a judgment like yourself, let's say you won a lawsuit and you have a judgment, this creditor cannot execute on certain exempt property. For example, in Texas, you're unlikely to be able to execute against someone's homestead. Some people say, well, I sued this guy and he lives in $1 million home, and I have a judgment for $30,000, and he may own this home outright, free and clear. Well, yeah, he may do that, but that's still his home, his primary residence, where he claims his homestead. And no matter how much it is, $1 million or more, that is shielded from any kind of execution of a judgment. Another thing that could be exempt is a personal vehicle. Another example, again, that's a bit extreme. Let's say you have a judgment against an individual for, let's say, $10,000, and this individual drives around in a Rolls-Royce Phantom that's fully paid. Well, if that's his personal vehicle that he drives on a daily basis, and that's the only vehicle that he has, that is also likely to be exempt from the execution of your judgment, and you're basically out of luck. So being able to collect is one of the first things you need to ask yourself before you decide to hire a lawsuit. A lot of people get caught up in fighting a lawsuit, putting pressure on the other individual or company, and whether I'm going to be able to prove my case, am I going to win? Yeah, let's say that you go through the entire process and win, and now you have a piece of paper. Are you going to be able to execute on the piece of paper, or is the piece of paper not worth the ink that's on it? So that's extremely important for you to think about. That's why a lot of times people feel that they have a case, or if they have a case and it's a company that has violated their rights, then they think that they have a chance of recovering because the company is more likely to have assets that they can execute on. And companies are also, they try to settle most of the time, although that's not always the case. If I had $1 for every time somebody walked into my office and say, Mr. CHerkaoui, just file the lawsuit, they're going to get scared and they're going to settle immediately. Just go ahead and do it. It's going to happen, and they're going to want to pay us so we can get out of their hair. That is usually not the case. You'll find some companies that really want to fight any type of plaintiff, and unless the cause of action or the claim is so outrageous and the evidence is so overwhelming, sometimes also if the claim garners some kind of media exposure, then the company is likely to want to just settle and make it go away. But most of the time, companies do retain lawyers, good lawyers that defend them, and the question goes back to question number 3 or question number 4. Do you have the patience and the endurance to fight this company all the way until the end and until you get the judgment? I'll be posting some videos about particular scenarios when it comes to suing, for example, your mechanic, your doctor, suing your landlord, suing your tenant, suing a school district. So if you're interested in that kind of content, I ask you to subscribe to my channel, hit the like button, and we'll see you soon. Have a good day.